I'll just commence by saying thanks everybody for your patience. We appreciate you hanging out in the space with us, in the virtual space or in person here. I'm clicking buttons as I'm doing this, and it's always hard to speak as you click, so here we go. I'll officially now, I think, open up the space. So bonjour tout le monde, welcome, bienvenue, online or in person, to Concordia University's fourth space. Thanks for joining us for a panel discussion that will address empathy and point of view in current social and environmental issues. Welcome to all panelists that are joining us online, and those of us who are here in person, welcome in as well, audience members, of course. So glad that you could join us. And I wanted to help situate you by letting you know where you are right now and where we're streaming. So we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands here in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And at Fourth Space, we work with our community to connect people to the ongoing research projects and initiatives throughout the university, through various activities, conversations, sometimes hands-on participatory workshops, and various other kind of formats that we use in order to mobilize and share the knowledge that's really coming out of the university and connect with our external partners. This week, it's our pleasure to have collaborated and continue to collaborate with Elastic Spaces to activate the Thinking Aloud project. So to get us started, I'll now pass the floor to Anita Taylor. Hi, Anita.
Hi, thank you very much. And it's a joy to be joining you from Dundee in Scotland. So let's hope moderation goes well from here to you there in Montreal and beyond. I'm introducing the session. Anna has already told you the title, and that public activations with visualization in 2D and 3D with emotion and new media will address empathy and point of view in current social and environmental issues. We have with us Emily Pelstring and Jenn Norton from Queen's, who will discuss their collaborative project after the Witch of Malleghem and the political implications of using reflexive humour in expanded animation to create alternative spaces of queer feminist resistance that challenge normative ways of thinking about science. From Dundee, we've got Anthony Head, who will present his sky animations using drones as points of light for projects including Amnesty International and Greenpeace. I'm going to talk to you about my research interests, which may seem intriguing in the context, which is talking about drawing both as a critical means for visualization, expression, and communication, but how it might work within interdisciplinary collaborations. And Maria Lantin will present possible ways to build empathy through VR and other technologies. And we're also joined by MA Concordia alumni Jorge Zavagno, who will present his recent research thesis on documentary ethics. The session has a series of presentations. We have a respondent who will join us at the end of the session, Gary Sankt from Drawing Projects UK. And we're going to start with me presenting. So I'm hoping that everybody's settled in the room, settled in their spaces on Zoom, and it's a joy to be here for this session. And I'm going to start with my presentation in drawing. So if you just forgive me while I press some buttons to share the screen, and then we'll be with you in a moment, because it takes me a moment to get to the slideshow. So because you can't see me, I'm an artist, a curator. I'm the Dean of Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design in Scotland at the University of Dundee. But I also run a number of initiatives that contribute to the scholarly infrastructure of drawing and provide opportunities for artists to test the role of drawing in a wide range of contexts. So I've titled the presentation A Drawing Correspondence because I'm thinking about how we use drawing in our everyday spaces, as well as a research tool and as a methodology. And I'm also thinking about how we weave a conversation and a correspondence in and through drawing, and how people have contextualized that. So I have woven through this presentation some drawings and what they might do, but also this text from John Berger, a conversation between John Berger and James Elkin, which is about From Their Distance and Drawings for Letters publication, which starts with how drawings offer hospitality to an invisible company which is with us. So thinking about drawing in its innate capacity to be with us through things, and to use some examples of how drawing knits and weaves experiences from history, from different contexts, from different places, and deals with a whole range of complex issues which are synthesized into one quite often humble set of materials. So this particular drawing is a very large scale drawing called The Old Keyhole Surgery. It's by an award winner in the Trinity Boy-Wolf Drawing Prize. And it deals with the idea of surgery, its relationship to an audience of angels, and the idea of how we might talk politically about saving organisations, which we're quite passionate about in the UK in terms of the National Health Service. So it's a drawing with complex meaning, complex readings, that's woven almost in a tapestry mode as it takes a line from point to point and develops a whole set of imagery. Barbara Walker is an artist who is reclaiming Black histories within visual language, and this particular piece thinks about how we might redraw history and how we might redraw a position from the subjects that are depicted through art history. So I will speed up. These are examples to contextualize what I want to talk about in terms of the capacity of drawing to address a range of issues through a range of means. Niobe's Children is again a project which deals with a sense of mirage, a sense of history, a sense of how we develop a lens on history and narrative, which forms many of our current relationships and talks to the complexities of environment, of identity, and other matters. And drawings might be performed. So Loram's drawings, which was performed in Dundee, it has an instruction, and it's collaborative and it's participative, and its end result is the end result of its history of making. But its main point and relationship is about the participation of actors, participants, people who join in to think about how we make a mark in the world and how that mark represents our place, how it gives us a space for attention, for connection. And this particular piece, which I won't play as a video, is about how we've been socially distanced, how we connect together, and how we drive each other through these sticks and wands that constrain activity and movement. So drawing is a broad church, and sometimes it's about its capacity to connect and make relationships across time, across subjects. This particular set of work by Sarah Casey addresses glacial loss of glaciers in the Alps and talks about the layers of things that we find, which are all jumbled in the way that they all come together because of the way glaciers are melting. But we also use drawing to ideate. These drawings of Norman Foster's, which are currently on show in the Pompidou, show how a quick thought, a fast thought, can transition into a whole different concept, which actually has a different relationship with audience and place and meaning and purpose. So the drawings for Wembley Stadium talk about winning, crowning, all of those things. And we might draw from not just to ideate, but to record and remember. So these drawings from the edge of a sketchbook catwalk are by a fashion journalist, and they're really notation, which enables us to remember our experiences and to connect back. Emma Stibben drawing in Antarctica, recording and documenting. Jerry Davis making something again around loss of environment. These drawings called Flood Story allow us to see what might be submerged through different environmental challenges. And Professor Tanya Kovacs is also at Dundee mapping water and the world and thinking about the whole environmental nature of water for us. Drawing can collapse history. So Adam Dant's drawing does provide a space. It talks about the history of Tate Britain, which was Millbank Prison, and encapsulates through those vignettes different elements of the narratives of an art world history through to a history of diaspora and imprisonment from Millbank Prison as they left to go to Australia. And we might have drawings which seem very simple as a sketch, like Paul Ryan's Concentrate, which is actually made of tiny dots and dashes of ink, looks like a very fast fluid drawing, but is entirely about the act of concentration, providing attention to what is a rendering of a visit to a concentration camp. My own drawings deal with a sense of scale, of apprehension across space, and a sense of identity and representation of the body. But what I wanted to talk to you about very briefly as a case study is a project that I've worked on since 2019 to 2022. So has Gary Sangster, who's our respondent, which was a project set up as a dialogue between art and archaeology on a specific archaeological site in central Anatolia in Turkey, and a number of both Turkish and UK-based artists working with two curators and the archaeologists to think about how we might interpret, understand, correspond, connect to this history. It's one of the oldest sites of civilization. It's the first grouping of a town with streets. And the whole project went through phases of conception, site visits, research, consultation, production of work, both exhibition development as well, exhibition tour, public programming, and a return to the site near Aksaray. And it's a huge project with a whole number of people approaching it in different ways. And the site is really important because it has very little cultural objects. And the whole project sort of, for me, was laced through the idea, from my perspective as somebody who draws, as the place where blindness, touch and resemblance become visible, using that conversation between James Elkins and John Burgin. On the site, how do we apprehend things? It's my shadow, my imprint, my vision, my space to negotiate. And for me, I found it quite hard to think about how drawing might play a role in this space where photography, film might seem a more automatic, or 3D visualization, automatic response. But actually the language of drawing crosses disciplines and is an automatic part of how we describe things. So for me, this moment of Professor Miraban Osbasaran, who's the lead archaeologist, drawing to talk us through the mapping of the site on the site with the finger, is the beginning of something. And then making drawings that just literally find a space and respond to the phenomenal site, but also the finds of obsidian, of grain, of working out how people lived and were buried, because there are hearths and burial spaces, the kind of natural phenomenon. So you see here some of the work through the other artist team exploring dyeing. But for me, the two key objects found, we can call them objects on the site, are the historic and extraordinary and potent find of the skull of a young woman who's had brain surgery. The obsidian, which was used and found in bulk, it's a volcanic site, but used for both tools of incision, both for living and surgery, but also as one of the first early mirrors, which sits with my work, and I'm probably over time, so I'll run quickly through these, which sits with my work in terms of thinking about seeing something else and how we locate ourselves through a mirror, through cameras, but actually a mirror allows us to locate our being and understand our position in the world through the dual lenses of our eyes, our brain, and our mind. So you can see some of my work, which is expansive, is about enwrapping through still medium in space. So finding an immersive relationship with a drawn image and thinking about how those are made and transcribed to occupy a space, which was about repositioning the history of a space and connecting across thousands of years to Neolithic times, from the idea of being in the present to the past. And those other artists worked through film, through documentation, through photography, 3D visualization. This has augmented reality alongside this piece as a map of the site, to sculpture carving, and making things, using things that were intrinsic to the site, through drawing that documented, reimagined, reconnected, drew over narrative and descriptive archaeological texts and descriptions and communications, to think about burials and hearths, and to think about actually how, when we were in the final showing in the museum, the skull was being visualized and documented through that process. that's a correspondence across time, through a collegiate team, through individual investigations with a current and common excavation, if you like, as a research method. And the sense that this is that drawing is a ghost subject. It's been a ghost subject in many ways through academia, but actually also that sense that before it became a questioning of something visibly there, it was a way of addressing the absent and of making the absent appear. And that for me is its space within the project that we're working on, and thinking about how that allows us to make a space to think about how drawing operates across different responses, different methodologies, and different innate means in terms of a fundamental means of communication expression through ideation, planning, proposition, documentation, and a whole range of other means. So my proposition for the workshop in October is around thinking about how we use drawing through a whole range of means and what drawing might mean within this whole question about visualization of the environment, of social purpose, social justice, and a whole range of issues there. So I will stop my presentation, having possibly run slightly over and hopefully given a sense of where my space is, but I also work on a whole range of other projects around visualization. And to introduce some of our other speakers, we're going to change the order slightly. And the first speaker is going to be Maria Lantin. So I'm assuming we're just going through and questioning at the end, who is an artist and computer scientist who's directed and built various media labs, from the Basically Good Media Lab at Emily Carr, University of Art and Design, and the Banff New Media Lab at the Banff Centre. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Lila and Santiago, Jorge, everybody who's worked so hard to make this happen. I'm really happy to be here. And Anita, thank you for your presentation. I think it will dovetail really nicely with some of the things that I'm going to talk about. So I'm just going to start a timer so I have some idea of what I'm doing. Okay, so we'll hit, oops. Sorry, trying to hit play on my slide. Play slideshow. Okay, so I'm talking to you from the point of view of having lost my religion in a very real way. Like, I think I was really enamored with technology from a very young age, and in about 2016, I completely shifted things because I realized the harm that technology could do, and that we needed a lot more consideration about how we develop things and why. So, and in particular, I was involved in VR and immersive technology, which I still very much love. And I saw it linked a lot with empathy, sometimes in good faith, sometimes in bad faith, and maybe sometimes just in a very shallow way, right? Like, I think we're always trying to find ways to get people to adopt technologies. And empathy is linked to love and you know, some soft feelings. So why not, right? And you know, so first, so it just bears investigation. Is it true? And how is it true? And how can we develop technology that would link to empathy in a very real way? So when we think about technology, it's a slippery word. Ellen McKay, I think, said that technology is anything that was invented after you're born. I think Douglas Adams would also add something about the fact that it's anything that doesn't quite work yet. So it's in a way like it's always kind of changing, but right now in this particular era, I think we're talking about technologies that connect us, that show us immersive images, you know, the whole metaverse, and then also things that process all of the information that we've put out there in the last 20 years or so on the web, on the internet. So, okay, so that's kind of the context. So in terms of definition, you know, I think of empathy as concern for other life out of a felt sense of shared reality and it's usually linked with a perceived need to help. So it's innate. You don't need to think about it. It'll just happen. You know, I'm not here talking, I'm sure there are pathologies which for some people that they can't feel it, but for most people it's just hardwired. You see something that you can relate to, and you immediately, if they need help, you want to help. So that's how we feel empathy. And it's been said that empathy doesn't scale, and it's true, it doesn't, but it does evolve into something else. So if we think of the body, which I think is a nice way sort of to ground what we're talking about here, you know, when you're feeling empathy, it's the heart, right? Like it's a kind of reaching out towards another. So if we stay grounded there and sort of expand out from there, so your heart space is expanding to include, maybe it's another human being, maybe it's an animal, maybe it's a pond, maybe it's a duck, whatever it is, right? Like how far are we expanding out to include another? Then that feeling can scale, right? And then you do whatever you want with that, but at some point you will want to act, and that has a cost. So we can think of empathy having a cost, and because of that, we can disembark from the empathetic response at any time. You know, you can go from barely feeling it and just going, well, I can't look, to like, oh wow, like I really need to do something, and changing your life course, right? There's a whole scale of things. So just to recap, you have empathy that is relatively intense, short-lived emotion, and then what I initially called compassion, but after hearing Giselle speaking about Donna Haraway's Sympoetics, I think sympathy is actually a better word, because sympathy implies a little bit less of a separation than compassion. You know, when we say compassion for or empathy for, we usually say sympathy with, right? So, and I think that is ultimately when you scale empathy, that's where you want to get to, is this feeling of like, I'm with you, I understand your concerns, and I have made them my own. And it's also a recognition, the fact that, you know, the concern of the duck near my pond is my concern, right? Like, you know, if it has a good environment, I have a good environment. So yeah, it's a more low-key, sustained emotion. So okay, so for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to talk about, okay, so what is the empathetic response? So we feel empathy. We can immediately have the desire to help. And then after that, we need to figure out, what do we help or not? So, and that's discernment. And it could be that you have it to give and you know how to help, and then you just go into action right away. And there's a bit of a cost to that, and you don't mind because you think it is for the greater good. So, or you say, oh my gosh, I can't do this. This is too much. You disembark, look away, and you never think about it again, or you just go on your day. And that there can be a moral injury to that. Like if you're, you know, walking downtown and like in Vancouver, the downtown east side, like I think there is a moral injury there where you're just like, you can barely look because of the scope of the suffering, right? So it's not, none of this is judgmental in any way. You know, we all have different situations. So, but you could, you know, if you didn't act right away, maybe the empathy shifts into compassion or sympathy, and then the desire to help comes at different times in different ways. And again, discernment is important and leads to action. So, okay, so now just remember the body. The body is the basis of the ground of all of this, right? Like we cannot sustain empathy and sympathy without actually sustaining a connection to our everyday world, right? So it has to be a very immediate sensing ground. So now I'm just going to talk while these slides play. They're now on automatic. And if you get distracted while I'm talking, just glance at a slide and think about how maybe technology could help with what is depicted on the slide. But for now, I'm also going to shift into the obstacles for empathy and empathetic response and how technology might impact that. So So at the small scale, right? So if the immediate feeling of empathy, technology is not immediately useful. I mean, it's a very embodied, direct response. However, if we have been desensitized by being continuously bombarded by abstract notions and we are no longer connected to our everyday world, then it could be that as we practice being more connected, that technology could be a reminder. But in order to be that, it needs to be extremely subtle and consensual and ambient. So, you know, you could even, like, if I go far to the future, right? If I have some kind of embedded AR glasses, like whatever, I'm in the world, and it could be that very, very subtly, it reminds me to pay attention to my surroundings, even though I'm heading to the metro and I'm stressed out, right? Like, it could be like that, but you know, it's really like a subtle support, and I hesitate to really even go there. At larger scales of empathy, we can think about technology being really useful at synthesis, at translation, at interpretation. Like, you know, that thing that we were doing now with artificial intelligence, you know, even though we're going down some pretty dark paths, I think the impetus is good in the sense that we put out all of this information and we're constantly like operating at these large scales, and we do need something to bring us back down to the body. And I think AI can help with that. And also, you know, this idea of like reminding us of what's out there that we can't see. So, you know, there's so much that we're not aware of. And I think VR can be a really good reminder that there are many things that we can care about. Okay, so yeah, being desensitized is one, too many abstractions in our daily lives, not enough sensing, just a lack of practice. This is an embodied practice, right? This is something you have to do every day. You go to your pond, you go to your forest, right? I don't think technology can really help that way. You can be afraid of the sadness that often accompanies empathy. That sadness is real. It's debilitating sometimes. And so to kind of be brave in that sort of outward circle of being open, again, that's not something that technology can help. In fact, technology often takes away, by taking away our attention, by readily giving us something else to look at, can really desensitize. So, but it can help with this feeling of like feeling under-resourced. So I do feel that the way that we've used technologies to connect, the way that, sorry, I'm just making sure that I'm over. So I'm just going to say that in general, we want the empathetic response to have fewer gaps. We want it to be fluid. We don't want people to disembark. And so we want to be hooked into several streams during the empathetic response. So whenever we're developing technology, whether it's VR, whether it's a film, whether it's a drawing workshop, whatever it is, it can't be on its own, right? It needs to contextualize where it is in that empathetic response and how it's going to connect to others that are doing that same kind of work, especially when they're working at large scales with very large problems like climate change, like racism, you know, like all of the different ways that people are hurting right now. So that's it. This is my sort of like the ground of thinking about technology and empathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for such a fantastic connective presentation and thinking about the sense of embodiment, which I think is very powerful. Given time, I'm going to introduce our next speakers, and I'm sure that thoughts are being collected and connected already by our audiences and panel members. But I'm really delighted to introduce Emily Pelstring and Jenn Norton from Queen's University to present on their collaborative project. So thank you. Over to you.
Does this work? Okay, thank you. So Jen, do you want to share your screen? Okay. So I'm Emily Pelstring. I am faculty at Queen's University in the Film and Media Department, where my teaching areas are animation, media and performance, and a graduate media production seminar. And I also have an artistic practice that spans many areas, including experimental animation, gallery-based, immersive installation work that is slightly sculptural, and also live performance oriented, music oriented collaborative work, where I work under two pseudonyms, Inflatable Deities, and that's a project with Jessica Mensch, and The Powers, which is a project with Jessica Mensch and Catherine Klein. So those are the main threads of what I do. For today, Jen and I are going to present on a collaboration that we did during the pandemic, as part of an online symposium that I co-organized with some colleagues called the Witch Institute. So I'll let Jen introduce herself and our third collaborator on this project, which is Jen's kid.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having Emily and I here today. I'm a visual artist, and I specialize in augmented reality, 3D animation, and kinetic sculpture. And I teach with Emily at Queen's University. I'm just going to troubleshoot this here. Why don't you? Oh, sorry. Just wanted to get to that window.
It's okay. We can take a minute to stop share and reshare. Sorry, I just went ahead. I'll start introducing the project, I guess. We're almost there, actually. Oh my God, sorry, we're updating. And we were late too, so this is not a good look. Please forgive us. The project that we did during the pandemic is called After the Witch of Malleghem, and it's based on, it's a remake of an image by Peter Bruegel the Elder called The Witch of Malleghem, which is from 1559. Jen, do you want to finish introducing yourself before we continue? Okay. We'll get to Jen and Edie after. So this is the print in question, and it depicts a witch and her assistants removing stones of madness from villagers' foreheads. And we were just really attracted to certain elements of this image, and when we decided to work with it, the surrealism, the grotesqueries, and the absurdities in this image. And the underlying draw to us was that it really reflected perceptions of the witch in medieval Europe. And we were on that track. We came across this image because of the Witch Institute. So this was an online symposium we held in 2021. And it was conceived initially as a platform for discussing the image of the witch in media. Really, the Witch Institute was looking at pop cultural images of the witch, which were numerous in the years leading up to the symposium. And we were trying to bring these into a broader critical conversation with scholars, artists, and current self-identified practitioners of various witch traditions and practices that are maybe adjacent to witchcraft. So what we wanted to do was focus on conceptions of witchcraft as a mode of resistance to the oppressive forces of church and state. And so this might mean, we're particularly interested in the ways that the witch has been reclaimed by marginalized individuals and communities as a symbol of autonomy and power. So for some, this might mean preserving or adapting ancestral practices that had been waylaid by colonial expansion, and then using them to try to heal current cultural traumas. And so we hosted lots of workshops and panel discussions and talks that address this idea of witchcraft as a decolonial praxis. We drew upon and looked at kind of folk magic traditions from different parts of the world. So in our research, we came across that Bruegel image while we were looking at this 1975, very second wave feminist pamphlet by Barbara Ehrenreich and Deirdre English called Witches, Midwives, and Nurses, A History of Women Healers. And so this focused on the way that lay healers in Europe were barred from their practice. So lay healers were herbalists, they were usually women. They were using methods to heal that were fairly pragmatic based on experimentation and observation of results and patterns over time, and then passing that knowledge down intergenerationally. But then the burgeoning academic medical establishment at the time, where they started having schools and designations and credentials, was sanctioned by the church, and therefore the healing practices were open only to men. And when the church took over medicine, their healing methods were often untested and more dangerous because they were ascribing a lot of the healing powers to God. So if they botched your trepanation or your bloodletting or whatever and you died, that was just God's will. So needless to say, according to this history, people were scared to go to official doctors and preferred their village healers who were using more gentle methods. So the church had to actively campaign against and delegitimize these herbalist healers. So we wanted to revisit this legacy or reclaim this legacy with a sense of humor. And so we made this AR app called Malleghem, which you can access at that link. If you have a phone, you could probably get the link just by pointing at the screen. And so we traced the original image and restaged the action from the print as closely as we could using available materials and resources. We created puppets and 3D assets as we performed all of the parts ourselves with Jenn's kid.
And we can demo it here for you. So I'm going to stop sharing and Emily will share her screen. And what we have is my phone tethered to Emily's laptop. And by accessing the app, which you see here, it gives us the camera of the mobile device. And when you aim it towards the image, the target image, Emily, can you turn it sideways? Thank you. No, that's okay. Sideways is good. So the camera is always scanning for to find the image that's within the app that we built. And it looks like there might be a little bit of lag in the feed, but I can assure you that it plays smoothly. And what we're seeing is a tableau of sorts using 2D and 3D methods to create depth. And the stones that are being cut from the head, if we could look at Edie getting the stones cut, are floating out from the frame and into the space of the user or viewer or user, whichever term you'd like to use. And you can see those three-dimensional aspects coming out into the world. The drawing was traced, and if you look at it at home, you'll be able to see that every element is animated. And the Bruegel birds are a combination of, so what you're seeing there is a 3D animation, but there are also puppets made by paper mache, and there's my child Edie, who had an active hand in actually building the costuming. So there, for me, somebody who works almost exclusively in my computer when it comes to making digital works, it was an interesting experience to work with my child, with Emily, being very hands-on with materials. And that we made this during COVID, and Edie was at home with me, and it felt very like there was some overlap in our methods of creating. and the content we were dealing with. Working with a child who was in our care during this intense time was a thematic overlap in my mind.
Yeah, and it was a really joyful process, and Edie's a brilliant performer, so it was super fun to make. So I guess we can pull up the last slide. So that the image is available online, so you can it totally works on your computer screen if you pull up the image. It's all at that link. And I guess what we wanted to bring to the table here today was this project where we were really using available technology and tools to produce illusions and visual trickery, and embracing the artifice that characterizes this kind of campy performance. And our project really takes an interest in that which is apparently impossible according to a rationalist perspective. So using acknowledged illusions and tricks to complicate our sense of logic, order, truth, and reason. And we choose to explore in this project that which has been deemed untrue or impossible with kind of a raised eyebrow, and using humor and fiction and fabulation. And so recent engagement with notions of magic and the supernatural, especially for artists, for us, it might be a way of acknowledging things that undeniably shape our experience of the world, but perhaps can't be explained by scientific rationalism. We're looking at Isabel Stanger's article, Reclaiming Animism, which talks about cultural biases against taking such ideas seriously, and suggests that magic is a compromised word and that it's seen as a threat to critical reason. And then she calls us to discover how to be compromised by magic, and tells us why that's an important challenge to undertake. So in that text, she's drawing on the concept of animism, which is important here, and also on Deleuze and Guattari's concept of the assemblage. And so these are ideas which at their core kind of recognize the complexity of a broad relational field and the interconnectedness of things in a way that troubles the sense of separation that an exceptionally human agency implies. So animism suggests that humans are embedded in a web of relations, entangled with the world of objects and materials and machines and animals and plants and spirits, which importantly also have their own agency and are also able to act. So this decentering human power in this way is not particularly compatible with a social system that is based on hierarchy, domination, and exploitation. Stengers talks about witchcraft and notes that a lot of the practices that have been historically described as witchcraft, often demonized as witchcraft, whether it's an imposed term or a reclaimed term, that these practices often embrace a more animistic sense of the world that also decenters human agency. So I just pulled this, she says, what the witches challenge us to accept is the possibility of giving up criteria that claim to transcend assemblages and that reinforce again and again the epic of critical reason. So Stengers is suggesting that we allow ourselves to be compromised by magic, and that if we can somehow perceive and accept that which we know to be impossible, that this can help us consider options for understanding our world that were closed off strategically. So that's all we have for you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily and Jen, and what a fantastic lockdown project, really bringing together and weaving together a whole range of issues through that technology, which actually has a wonderful humour that deals with things that are hugely serious. There's a huge Witches of Scotland project here in this area of Scotland, which is about reclaiming justice. And I think maybe there are some connections there to think about too. But thank you very much. And again, we're moving on speedily, so we're absorbing lots of information from everyone. And I'm hoping the audience are gathering together questions, which I think you can load into the chat or save for the latter part of the event. But I'm really delighted to introduce Jorge Zavagno, who is an MA Concordia University graduate student who's been working as a production and post-production supervisor and technical director of stereoscopic 3D projects and many other projects of our time, who's going to talk about shadows of reality. So really looking forward to hearing from you, Jorge.
Thank you, Anita. Let me just share. There we go. So I'm presenting inside a VR video. We'll see how this works technologically. So as Anita mentioned, I am in the MA student, just graduating, and I'm going to present my 2 research creations, one documentary tools and shadows of reality, which I'll focus most of the presentation on. So I started this in the MA project in looking into ethical dilemmas in documentary filmmaking. I worked as an assistant editor in 3D IMAX documentaries, and I was the post-production supervisor of independent docs, which exposed me to a lot of situations where ethical dilemmas arose, and I saw that there was a need to investigate this and see what I could do to help. So the first project that I'll talk to you a bit about is documentary tools. So documentary tools is a 3D stereoscopic video installation. As you see here, it's a box that is meant to look like a box where video cameras came in the 90s. What I did is that I took about 30 photos of video cameras, from recording mini DV to floppy disks to 360 cameras. The idea being that I was enticing the audience, which I hope to be documentary filmmakers, to look at these tools that were used so much by filmmakers, and to take a look at a self-reflection tool that I made. The self-reflection tool is a set of questions that a filmmaker can ask themselves and with the help of others about ethical dilemmas and how they can deal with them or make a decision. It includes an annotated bibliography, which is a resource because right now there's a lot of protocols are being created on best practices for ethical filmmaking, how to film indigenous communities or minorities. So what I did here is I'm using this 3D box as a tool to lead into the self-reflection tool. So then I can show a little bit here of how it was filmed. The styrofoam is to make it look as if it's inside a box. So when the installation is put on, you use polarized glasses and it looks as if the cameras are there with you. So I'll move on to shadows of reality. Here first, I wanted to show some of the videos that led to Shadows of Reality, which is a 360 video, VR. So here, this is the first test that I did, which was looking at all the different objects and how 360-degree cameras analyze the objects. And then here, I started to look into shadows. In this video, it's hard to see possibly, but you're inside a shadow. So I filmed it so that the camera tricked you into thinking that you were inside the camera and the shadow became an object. So I was looking at the different ways in which shadows can be objects. Then in this project here, I'm starting to use collaging of different shots and placing the viewer in the air and not in a room. Then in this one here, I am starting to use 2D material to be put inside a 360-degree space, and how I can incorporate the two, the 2D video and the 360. And in here, I am using a bit of cloning, I suppose, to do a presentation, and I wanted to see how I could shift time and be playful with the viewer, you know, because they can see me, and it's a bit of a light mood. And it's the first time I film in the black box, which is where Shadows of Reality takes place. So here is the first scene in Shadows of Reality. Shadows of Reality is a 360 video, and the main concept behind it is that documentary films are not mirrors of reality, but they are shadows of reality. When you have a shadow, there is someone, or in many cases, there's a source of light, there's someone controlling the object that is getting created a shadow onto a screen. So that I took that parallel, and I separated the scenes into different stages in documentary filmmaking. This first stage being the concept stage. So here the viewer is floating, and different shadows or drawings show up. Just the same idea as when you're a filmmaker and you have to choose what your first what the concept is. Then here we have pre-production. I have lined up all the objects. So this also works to get the viewer to turn around as they're looking around, and it encourages the immersion so that the viewer remembers that they're in a 360-degree space. And the concept up here is straightforward in that the objects here are what a subject would be in a film. So here you're lining up all your subjects, if it's for interviews or what you're going to film, and making that decision. Here it's production. So what you see is a projector shining a light onto an object. I have lined them up and used that collage style that I mentioned before. Here I am making it so that there's production. The sound is the sound of the projector making that, and I wanted to show that like the filmmaker sets things up. This is a still, but in the actual video, you see the manipulation that the person has onto those objects, and that's a commentary. The idea being that if you're a filmmaker watching this, you would have you would make the connection that you as a filmmaker, you're actually manipulating the subject that you're working with. A lot of this project is meant to start a conversation with filmmakers about what happens in the filmmaking process. Here is you're immersed in the Black Box Theater, which is across the street. You again see the light with the object, but now you can see where it shines. I have placed the camera in between the projector, the object, and the filmmaker, and the screen. This is to remind you that that's where you as the viewer are in the filmmaking process when it comes to the editing process, that you're in between the camera, the filmmaker, and the screen. Then after I move on to this here, that is what I call distribution. So in the video, you would see me, again, I have used the cloning to keep it light, but you see me opening the screen and setting up the cinema. This is a reminder that in this stage of distribution, there's an active moment in which the cinema needs to be created, where something gets screened, how. That's a decision that is being made by the filmmaker, and connecting it to the self-reflection tool, you would see that those decisions come with certain choices. Sometimes there are even ethical dilemmas. Then it goes on to do a projection of a film, quote unquote. There's a film about shadows. In here, it starts the process of use, all within distribution. The last part is, it's hard to see, but it's that same cinema starts to dissolve into the viewer. That is to, I put that as the stage in filmmaking of impact. That's the impact that the film has on the audience, on society, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. And there I'm reminding the viewer that films are consumed. So trying to make them feel like that all that they saw is consumed. And I think I'm good on time, but so I'll finish there. So just to say that the VR project and the documentary tool are meant to be as conversation starters, specifically with documentary filmmakers, but also to introduce those who are not documentary filmmakers to the fact that what happens when a documentary is made, and to get them to see some of the behind the scenes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jorge. That was really fascinating, thinking about that whole role of the shadow in film and visualization, and reeling with the idea of the first painting and Plini's account of that coming 360 circle to something around this technology. So thank you so much for that. And our final presentation is by Professor Anthony Head, who is has a joint appointment both at the University of Dundee and with Celestial, a company with drone animations. So I'm going to hand over to Anthony to talk about screen space to airspace. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Anita, and hi everybody, and thank you, Jorge, for your excellent in-depth talk. I'm going to talk about sort of the brief sort of history of what I've been doing for the last 3 years. So hopefully you can see my screen. And yes, screen space to airspace. Literally about 3 years ago. Sorry, before that, I'm a digital artist. I've been doing that for over 20 years or so. I use computer code, and I've been creating over that time various sort of screen-based sculptural forms and artworks and sort of environmental artworks in 3D. I've always been interested in interactive 3D in particular, rather than sort of rendered animated 3D. And about 3 years ago, in my hometown, actually, of Frome in Somerset in the UK, I met a sort of small startup company called Celestial Labs, and they wanted to make drone shows, drone light shows. And at the time, I didn't have any drones. But when I met them, and they met some of my students as well at the time, I was teaching at Bath University. And they, I said, well, what you need is, tools to be able to create these animated forms. So sort of since then, I've been, working with them and more, in order to try to create tools which we then use to create animations. And now I'm going to sort of show you a number of different projects. So I'll more briefly show you. Although all these things are animated, and this guy, I'm just going to show you the still images, but they can all be seen on the celestial.show website. We started to say the first thing we ever did was in 2020. It was a New Year's Eve thing. It was during the middle of COVID, which is potentially unfortunate for a company starting up wanting to do live shows in front of audiences, because we couldn't do a live show at that time. So we made this film for Edinburgh Hogmanay, what would have been the New Year's Eve celebrations. We did get to go up into the Highlands of Scotland, where away from people at the time, and film drones. We set up this base, essentially this little base, and you can see here all this sort of like the layout of where the drones are. And then we made this into a film. So we sort of filmed our drones on in situ, and then filmed with drone cameras around the city of Edinburgh. And we then composited that and made a sort of 3-part show. sort of three part online film, which featured poetry and music, all to really sort of celebrate, well, not celebrate, actually to sort of reflect on the year that people had at that point with COVID. So sort of going over sort of the meaningful part of it was from what was still then obviously carried on to be still quite an emotional time for people. So that's the end of 2020. Following doing that, we made this film. It went, it got a lot of sort of distribution on YouTube, sort of, millions of views. So it was very, popular, which is good because it gave Celestial as a company, a brand new company still, a reputation. And Greenpeace got in contact with us saying they would like to make a film, which also featured drones. It's partly because the film industry was all sort of in a mess at this time, and there were no public events, so that also made it difficult for Greenpeace to do a lot of their work as well. And the G7 summit was coming up, so they wanted a film to sort of like raise awareness, sort of make a point to the G7 summit, which was in Cornwall in England at that time. So we made this film which featured voiceover, mixed actually projection live onto various locations, and then we also then composited these drones. So this, here's a drone polar bear. It was filmed up in the sky. It is like about 60 meters long, but then superimposed to be in this sort of Arctic landscape. And likewise, this whale here. And during this time, I'm sort of developing myself these sort of different techniques, different ways of creating animations, because as I say, there wasn't a piece of drone show animation software at the time. So it's all about trying to think, well, how can we do this? How can we make a whale? How can we make it move and animate? So this particular case used 3D models, which we then convert into sort of drone form and fly in the sky. Amnesty, a few months later, got in contact with us, actually during the same sort of time. And wanted also a film, to try and obviously promote, raise awareness of things they do, and it's just interesting at the time that we were able to the started work, and actually get paid, because it's drone shows are expensive businesses to run. The company started off with no drones, and then by this time, sort of nearly a year later, we had sort of 300 drones that we could sort of explore in animation terms. That also then led on to another sort of, in this case, environmental project for the Eden project, which is the large sort of greenhousey kind of space in Cornwall, sort of very sort of nature environmental site in Cornwall. These are drones close up there. Hundreds of them all lit up. They're all controlled by computer, and that's really what the software written helps do. It sort of prepares these animations for them, so that they can all fly up like individual little bugs in the sky, all sort of pushing each other out of the way virtually, but not actually clashing into each other in real life. This is sort of this was filmed directly over. You can see the sort of big greenhouses here in the Eden project, and that tree was animated. It's all animated to music. And what's going with voiceover, and had an ecological theme to it. It was later in 2021 where in the UK finally lockdown was being sort of lifted, and by October we were able to do our first sort of public-facing show. We did it where company is based here in Frome, had a sort of audience around 7,000 odd people or so, which then Frome's only a small town, so it was a very good sort of showing. We're starting to, this is an interesting sort of like wind sculpture kind of form that you can see in the sky. So it just spins around, literally, is like a wind sculpture. We did various other sort of formations in this point. And keep sort of exploring different techniques. You have great ideas of what you can do, and then the difference between sort of drone animation and real animation is that you are sort of limited by physics. You can't make these things fly too fast. The scale of this is not that easy to see, but it's about 60-70 meters wide, this particular form. Then just a few months later, we were starting to actually do some work in Australia. So we got our first job in Australia, which is great because got to work with First Nation artists in terms of coming up with artwork, which we then interpret into drone form. And of course, sort of the thing with First Nation art, for people who do dot sort of paintings, that worked really well with what we did. Just a few months later, we'd already been in planning for a few months. We showed our sort of first sort of thing, sort of feature show, as we called it, Sky Song. It was a mix, so we called it an integrated show. It featured artistically First Nation artists, musicians and storytellers. And then the actual performance was shown over many nights, like was the Melbourne show was shown over many nights. This is shown actually in a large vineyard outside of Adelaide. And the sort of point is we're trying to integrate and get more complex of what we're doing, really, increasing complexity. You can see the drone butterfly up in the sky, you can see the moon in the background. And then we've got these 3 large projection screens in front, sort of translucent projection screens, and sort of show lighting all mixed together, sort of really stepping up the complexity of how we do things. This was also a 3-part drone show. So our average drone shows last about 8 minutes, but we split our sort of drone fleet into 3 to create 3 shows which appeared one after the other to make it a longer sort of flight and more sort of creative possibilities as a result of that in terms of storytelling in particular. Just to give you an idea of scale, these screens each one is about 25 meters wide. So we're talking about nearly 200 feet wide here. A few months later, we did a show back in Coventry. It's called Our Wilder Family. This is a picture not of drones. This is actually a picture of the audience, all with their mobile phones watching the drone show, which is a sort of interesting sort of point about these kind of art forms when they're out in the public. It's if everybody wants to film it, everybody almost watches it through their phone, despite it obviously being there in the sky right in front of them. This is a shot from the sky. Particularly if this is the sort of motif for sort of the mascot of Coventry. But yeah, this had like voiceover going over it, sort of poem going over it, read by a child, I think. And there's also your music going and along with it. And we think you find that with these forms, just seeing a drone show, no matter how sort of interesting it is on its own, but when combined with music and combined with words, it has much more sort of resonating power. Racing through, so we get to the this is just a selection of some of the projects we've done, sort of maybe some of the more relevant ones, but we did as a company, we're obviously increasing our reputation as we go on, and then finally we got the role to do New Year's Eve in London. This is not really such a, well, because this is a sort of celebratory show. This is the Earth you can see here. And this is a sort of the height it is literally about 5-6 meters above the ground. But rising up to about 70 meters above the ground. And in, obviously it's New Year's Eve, so what happened a bit later in the show, fireworks started appearing, and it's, just lots of sort of glitz, I guess, we're probably in this case. But it's always good, every time we get to do these sort of commercial shows, obviously pays the bills and enables us to explore with some techniques, which can use some more either artistic or more, I can say, worthy endeavors. And then this last show we did publicly, just this year, was for the Eurovision Song Contest. It was a live broadcast in Liverpool. And this once again was a mixing projection on the screen, live concert. You could see the audience down on the left, just sort of blobs on the left, really. And as a televised show on the BBC. Here you can see the Liver Bird, which is the once again the sort of mascot of Liverpool, and that's a close-up of it too. There's so much we trying to do with drone shows, just not making the animations, but also recording them, organizing them. We've got to maintain our drone fleet as a company. We've got about 800 drones here in the UK now, which we're using, and having more drones just enables me, sort of me and my team of animators to sort of create more interesting forms and more expressive ideas. Our next show, this is a mock-up of it, it hasn't happened yet, is in July, and it's at the Point of the Bluff Vineyard, and this is the most local show to Montreal. It's only a few hundred miles away in upstate New York. And it's for the Muscular Dystrophy Association. So once again, and it'll be created into a film as well, a sort of documentary film. So the downside of showing the pictures here of the things is you don't really sort of see some of the 3D depth and some of the 3D shapes that we form. So this is a giant revolving sort of tunnel is sort of galaxy-like, and then it forms later into a more sort of mountain shape. And then, as well as just obviously, I'm developing new tools and doing sort of day-to-day animations, or sort of every few weeks I'm making new stuff. I'm also running a project called sort of live control. So all drone show animations at the moment are literally animations, they're recordings, and we just send them to the drones and they fly and they do what they're meant to do. But I'm working alongside a colleague of mine, Professor Joe Hyde, and we're making, but basically the idea is like using even music inputs or hand inputs to be able to control the drones in real time, as if we're conducting them. Through playing music, with our hands and using camera inputs and other different kinds of inputs. That's a big year-long project that we're doing, and we're modifying drones to try and do that. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be able to demonstrate that project properly. And it just gives that sort of live angle to what goes on, and hopefully, actually, with the theme of empathy or sympathy and things, I think it has a potential, by being live and being more unpredictable, to have even more of an emotional impact. I'm going to carry on improving methods for animation. Integrating stage lighting and new sort of kinds of concepts and tools for formations. And the other sort of area we're exploring now, which because it is not just a buzzword, but sort of really impacting on the creative industries, is that the use of sort of automation and AI in the creative process. It's such a big exploding topic that I think is one which has to be sort of aware of and on top of. And that's the end of my performance. There's a big drone eye for you. Performance and presentation.
Thank you. What's a performance? I mean, I think what's extraordinary about the drone animations is the sheer scale, and yet their capacity to make it possible for people to connect in very intimate ways. And I think the mobile phone excitement of them kind of demonstrates that. So I think thank you for such an extraordinary suite of projects that you've presented, and really amazing to see how those things are developing into the future. So thank you, Anthony. We need a round of applause for you somewhere in the room. Brilliant. I feel that we've had, I think we've got a lag on the applause. I feel that we've had an amazing array of presentations that have covered everything from all kinds of technology, from the point of a pencil through to this amazing new technology, and considering how AI also connects into this through automation, into visualization and interactivity. And I think, we've dealt with documentation, critical inquiry, I think historic latencies to the present, empathy is the deep and big thing, and the way that we connect through all these means of visualization to really critical things about what it is to be human. But I'm going to invite our respondent, Gary Sangster, to join us and to start the questions. Please, everyone from the audience, think about the questions you have too. Gary will start that conversation, but this is an open conversation between the panelists, between the audience, between anyone who's zooming in, to consider the sense of public activations and visualization and its relationship to empathy and critical social and environmental issues. So over to you, Gary.
Many thanks, Anita. I just want to thank all the presenters for the range and depth of their presentations. Their agendas and their programs are incredibly fascinating and incredibly rich. And each presentation could warrant a kind of a whole Q&A session. And we only have a brief amount of time. And I had the benefit yesterday of being a respondent, and I decided to respond a little differently today. And based on what I've heard in the presentations, I'd like to pose several questions for the panel to respond to or react to. Obviously, there's not a lot of time to think deeply about any of the questions, but you have already thought deeply and presented in-depth material about your projects. So I've kind of been noting what I thought about when I was listening to the presentations and reading a little bit about the work today. And I have 7 questions that come to mind. One is about experimentalism. One is about the nature of the interface. One is about authenticity. Another is about empathetic technology. Another is orders of engagement. And the 6th would be world building. And finally, for Anthony, I guess especially, the spectacle or spectacular. So let me pose these 7 questions for you to respond to or not, in a sense. If you have a response to them, that would be great. So I think with regard to experimentalism, I think we're living in this regime, and we have been for almost 150 years, of innovation, invention, and experimentation. But those drivers, in a sense, diverge from tradition and disrupt existing or familiar visual and narrative forms. And I guess my question is, how much discomfort does experimentalism cause the viewer? And how can we activate technology to lessen that discomfort as opposed to embrace it or produce it? Then the second question I have is about what I describe as interface intrusion. Utilizing complex technologies amplifies or enhances the viewer's experience. There's no question of that. But those interfaces, do they alienate us from the accessible experiences because of the artificiality of the interface? Most of the interfaces that we looked at today were very artificial. And that's not to say that a painting and drawing is not an artificial interface either. But how do we lessen the kind of alienation effect of those interfaces? And then I have a question about authenticity. And I think a lot of what's underlined the presentations I viewed in the last both days, yesterday and today, have been this pursuit of authenticity, this pursuit of lived real experience. And when we're engaged in an expressive activity, whether we're making art or writing novels or making films or producing virtual reality, we're representing things, we're retelling it. And the question is, how do we retell and represent those things in the least inauthentic way? And how can new technologies enhance our sense of authenticity as opposed to disrupt our sense of authenticity or our pursuit of authenticity? Or how can new technologies, in fact, increase our level of engagement? And then I was thinking about Maria's presentation and about this idea of empathy and the pursuit of empathy and how technology can enhance our understanding of empathy and now our empathetic reactions. And I was wondering, what is empathetic technology itself? What tools, what are the markers of empathy that might characterize the tools of technology? What are the elements that we would look for in a technology that would produce that sense of identification and that sense of empathy? When we watch a film or look at a painting, for instance, we're consumers. We sit back and we identify and empathize with the narrative if it's appropriate that we do so. But what with more participatory technologies, how do we produce that sense of empathy? So I was thinking about, and that ties into the next question about orders of engagement. I think traditionally there's been a dominant regime of observation where we observe through directed experience a painting or a drawing or a museum experience, or an artwork that, in a sense, sits on page or sits on a wall before us. But obviously, for the past 30 odd years, maybe 50, there's been a tendency to seek participation, in which audiences might have a kind of self-directed experience within the boundaries and parameters of the space and technology. So I'm thinking about what are the different effects of this shift towards a more engaged experiential engagement, I guess, a more experiential engagement. And then there's world building. Obviously, technology gives us the opportunity to move beyond depictions and representations of the world towards projections and modeling of the world, and then on to spatialization and a fashionable term at the moment, immersion. So I guess I'd ask any of the panelists, really, what do you think the next step is? What is the future of world building for you? And then the final question that occurred to me was around spectacle and spectacular. So we have things like massive light shows and massive fireworks shows, celebratory events. And Anthony's really producing astonishing work with his drone shows. I guess the question is, what are the implications and what do we see as a potential for gigantic scale possibilities of technology? Because we can scale things way bigger than before. So they're the 7 questions that I pose, and if any of the panelists would like to respond to them, I would be keen to hear their reactions.
Looks like people in the room might want to respond first, unless yeah.
I can start. I'll go back to the first question. When you say discomfort, in making my research creation, like the 2 videos, I was living in having to deal with how much discomfort I'm giving the audience. Doing stereoscopic 3D, literal question is, at what point does someone gets a headache, or at what point is it too much? So I have to really play with that amount of discomfort. And then with my VR project, I had to figure out what was too much, especially for the last scene when I say, oh, I'm going to make the room spin, that I had to pull back from that because it was too much. I wanted the viewer to feel something, but I had to really figure how far to take it when it came to that, but still make them spin around. I even recently discovered that I have to show the VR project before I show the 3D project, because if I do the opposite, people will feel nauseous. So there's just that part of like, how do I have to deal with discomfort? And then the other side of it was, I was looking at ethical dilemmas in documentary filmmakers. So when I'm talking to a filmmaker, I have to point to them that even though they may believe that they are really good and all their decisions are not problematic, I had to figure out how I could get to that point of, hey, how you did it wasn't well. There's stakeholders in the project that suffered because of your decision. You did it without thinking of others, so I had to deal with that discomfort, which is where my documentary tools project ends up being this weird little, I'm gonna get you to look at a self-reflection tool that I purposely had to make it that you do on your own. So I put if they want to find out if what they're thinking or how they make decisions is right or wrong, I'm gonna let them sit with themselves on that one. But I had to deal with a lot of how much discomfort do I push onto the viewer, onto filmmakers when making this project.
Cool, thanks, Jorge. I think, can I come in? Yeah, just I'd try to roughly answer some of the questions, Gary. I think particularly, well, technology and computer-based or digital-based artworks, but always it does provide, there is a sort of sense of alienation, I think, but I've always observed from audiences, mainly because they don't understand how things are made. How do you make this? I don't know. I know how to draw, but how do you make this virtual reality thing that I'm looking at? And it's the same with drone shows, I find too. Nobody knows how we make them, and indeed, it's even difficult to explain how they're made as well. So that in a sense that provides an element of, like, I could say, an element of wonder, but also a sense of disconnection from that. I'll sort of summarize in terms of like world building kind of ideas and scale. With drone shows, it's weird. The scale is, if I mention it in numbers, it's huge. But if you view it on your mobile phone, it's tiny. Or if you view it from a mile away, it's tiny. But maybe it's tiny, but in a sense, but it's not tiny because you can see the world that it's in. And also there's novelty in drone shows still at the moment, and maybe less so now in VR, in the world of VR and things. And novelty, the novelty itself is possibly actually slightly a disconnect from trying to gain the meaning of things, because you're just overwhelmed by what is this new thing. So it's a sort of struggle there to try and give meaning to what you do and to be able to make connection through it. And just in a slightly not technical sense, I think with drone shows, it's very much in its infancy as a sort of visual art form. I sort of view it as being back in sort of the early 1970s or the 1970s for computer graphics. We've got very limited things we can do. Everything moves so slowly. You've got really, really low resolution. And we're exploring, I sort of do feel really that in terms of art forms, I'm exploring, I'm following the footsteps of the Whitney brothers, kind of thing. I'm just doing abstract geometric things with limited resources. As such, even though the resources are very expensive and flying up in the sky, and for lots of technology behind it, but as a sort of visual art form, it's still quite simple. So yeah, that's some of my points.
Is that Emily back to join us?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on experimentalism, the way that you sort of described it as being a space of discomfort for the viewer sometimes, and then asking if the artificiality or of the interface alienates us from experience in some ways. And I do think, and asking if we need to use technology to lessen that tension, or if we can, to lessen discomfort or lessen tension. And I think that there are, of course, many times in life when we want to lessen tension and lessen discomfort, and that's a really important goal to have in a lot of situations. But I think for art making, or at least the specific kind of art making that we were engaging in, alienation can actually offer a productive tension sometimes. I think that some forms of alienation from an experience or a subject matter or an image, for example, are very helpful because they help us to look at something askew, and sometimes that can help us see where there are limitations in our original thinking. Or, for example, Stenger's being open to the uncomfortable space of magic, which is irrational, for example, being open to this discomfort that is in that space where, we don't have answers, where there's this kind of unknown or something that is not understood or not codified yet or not explained. That can be a very destabilizing space to be in, and therefore uncomfortable. And to me, experimentalism, there's some value in existing in that space and in being uncomfortable in that space. And then I also think of what is uncomfortable about some of the style of performance that we were engaging in, which is really emerging from drag culture, which at its roots pokes holes in the rigidity of the gender binary. And that tradition has really informed, camp, feminist, queer performance. I think it's a really important kind of discomfort to exist in. And that's the kind of space where I think that experimentalism, or taking something that is understood or that we thought was understood and then making it weird is actually a good thing to do. Or it's one thing that can be done that can also be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the idea of the offset a lot lately, and to do precisely that, to elevate something out of its original context, as a way to underscore some type of meaning. And a lot of the augmented reality works that I've been doing and that I did with Emily and Edie was a way of having some kind of experience with something across time in your space, and revisiting these, in this instance for Malleghem, these marginalized people who were rendered ridiculous in this Bruegel print, and for us to have this sort of like revisiting and having the viewer be able to spend time within the frame of the print, but also for it to come out of the print, to have this offset, was some kind of anachronistic revisiting, to touch on people that were represented, and where we actually had some discomfort in creating the work by recycling, like bringing some of the problematic imagery back into circulation. And then once again, we had to figure out how to do another offset and another offset through this media to try to get, using the spectacle actually, to make it to not look as though we were trying to practice through mimesis, but to create something that was campy, something that was artificial. So to use the artifice to try to get closer to a meaningful place.
I think I can speak a little bit more about empathy and technology, but maybe first I want to say something about spectacle, because I think there is something about awe that is sometimes extremely useful. So it can actually bring us out of a way of thinking. And also usually with spectacle, you end up being around crowds, which is also a nice way of connecting with community. So I think spectacle has definitely a use. But for empathy and technology, it's really, for me, about never forgetting the body. I mean, technology has so much, it doesn't need help, right? Like it's everywhere. We're told to use it. We're told to mind it. We're told to read about it. So when I think about how we create empathetic technologies, or technologies that help with the empathetic response, I think of things that are mindful of scale and rhythm. So what are you asking us to be empathetic for or with? So, you know, and how am I going to connect to that? And how do I end this experience that you're giving me? How do I connect both backwards and forwards? So backwards towards myself, like how do I be in the world with this new information? And also, how do I connect forward? Like what are other groups doing? So being really mindful of that sort of flow of the empathetic response and where we situate ourselves in there. And also sovereignty, consent, agency, all of that. Like, you know, we have been embedded in manipulative technologies for a very long time. And when you're dealing with emotions, especially emotions so close like empathy and love, we have to be really, really careful with that. So, you know, we have not given our consent to being manipulated by these algorithms that are out right now. We have a chance right now to think about how we're going to give consent with AI. We're running to get there, right? But it's not too late, and I think we need to think about that.
And I guess to follow on from that, I think it's how do we create conditions that evoke curiosity and engagement, connectivity around key not necessarily key issues, just they might be very modest. I think empathy and love are critical things. But I think for me, it's actually, it doesn't matter what the tool is, it's about the scale, the connectivity and the context, so the specificity of what's being delivered through the means of making that probably matter. But I'm going to go back to that phrase of evoking curiosity, and I think that whole sense of spectacle and collaboration are really important, because we have actually become moved into quite an insular relationship to the world, and I think one of the advantages of whatever we might call immersive or other is about giving attention to something. And I think that opportunity to create a space for attention, whether it's through drawing or whether it's through the spectacle of a drone show or the engagement with a reanimation of something from history that still talks to the present, I think it is something in that space which is about how do we remake our relationships to each other across culture, across space, across time, to understand what we're doing, both in terms of social issues, social justice, the climate, environment, politics, all of those things are there. And it's actually about how do we be in the world, and how do we be in the world in a responsible way, whatever that means, and that this is contextual too. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but I think for me it's somewhere in that space to think about, you know, all of the things that we bring from different perspectives, to give them actually an arena, a space, a public airing, and how we engage an audience to experience those things with empathy or with connection seem to me to be the critical thing. So the experiential does matter, and it matters more than ever, I think. But it's how do we create conditions to do that? Back to the respondent.
I guess I thank you for those perceptive responses. That was really great. I guess one of the things that comes to me from what you've just said is the significance of ethical decision making. I mean, the arts and much of fine art, anyway, visual art, it doesn't have many regulations, if any. It's a kind of free-for-all. And when you get into the realm of thinking about communities and audiences and people and documentary filmmaking, lots of ethical questions are raised. And one of the things that I've found very helpful throughout my career in museums is the fact that museums have really worked hard, not to create a regulatory agency, but to create codes of practices that would indicate what is the best practice and what does provide respect for the artifact and respect for the community who acquired that artifact or will use that artifact or see that artifact. And so I think in our respective fields, the more that we can codify best practice in an unregulated field, the field of arts and culture, the better off we are in terms of communicating that we operate within a set of ethical standards, and that our free-for-all is to do with how we think about representation and visualization in its relationship to community.
Thank you. I think that's, I mean, I think that call for codes of practice and communities of practice sits well within this whole project, I think, to think about what goes forward. I'm conscious, actually, as the person moderator from a distance, of time, and I'm wondering if there are any other questions from the audience that need to come in the few minutes that we have for that before we thank all of the wonderful presenters and our moderator and respondent as we come to a close for the event. And it might be that Santiago or Jorge might be able to assist with, is there anyone in the room who wants to ask a question of anyone in particular?
Just like the panel participants to share how they see shared joy, because that's another aspect of empathy in their work, in relationship to the shared joy that audience has with each other when they're having when there's more than one person consuming or observing a work or experiencing work. The kind of the empathy that takes place between the viewer and the characters presented in the work itself. Yeah, and the other forms of shared joy.
That's a great question. Who would like to go first? Do the people in the room go first?
I feel
We'll
like
go around the table.
That's an easy entry point for me and Jen, I think, because so much of that project was about that. But more in terms, I think it's because it's funny, you know, and it's got like elements of delight. Like this child's face is so ridiculous. Their performances are so over the top, and the original image was already funny. We didn't need to change any of the content. We already were sharing joy looking at it, and the whole impetus for the project came from us laughing at parts of the Hammer of Witches, this really misogynistic document that the church published. So a lot of it came out of us just making jokes and giggling at that stuff together, and it's really a way of coping with dark times. So shared joy, I mean, this was like the height of the pandemic that we were doing this. We weren't even really allowed to like be using the space we were using. We had to kind of sneak around to get it done. It was a really important little hate, and we were just becoming friends, and we're both going through tough times. So it was a really important, it just felt so important to have like a space or a haven to do something that felt really fun. Like it's critical, but the part of it that's fun is like sometimes like taking some space and carving it out to intentionally experience joy can be an act of resistance to a system that really does not prioritize that or value it oftentimes, especially in the kinds of labor that we do. So.
Oh, I just wanted to talk about from an audience perspective. It was really important to us that this was a free app. It was accessible through this poster that we had disseminated through several galleries, and that also be free. So it was a time to kind of, one, there was this physical object, but they could also access it on a website. And it was kind of like, in my mind, I don't know if this is like my neurosis or what, but it just was like giving performances with people via their mobile device, but this little enactment happening in multiple places at multiple times just seemed very joyful to me in a time where we were also isolated.
I think that sympathetic joy, it doesn't follow extremely well from empathy. Empathy usually is about concern for some sort of suffering, but sympathetic joy is a way to practice being open. And some of my work, especially the Epic Walk diaries and the field recordings that I do, are about that. Carol Gigliotti recently wrote a book about the creative lives of animals, and really emphasize this issue of like looking closely at what's happening around you. So don't just go to the pond to look at the ducks, look at a particular duck. What is that duck doing? Okay, they may be sitting still for a very long time. Keep looking. Eventually they will have a thought and do something else. And they will have an interaction with another duck. And so, you know, it can feel very small, but at some point you get to that sympathetic joy of like just life. And springtime is like the most joyful time in our little piece of the world, right? So I think it's important to get there, and I try to get there with my work in a contemplative way. So whenever I display all of the data that I've collected from the walks, it's you know, I use sound, you know, in terms of how I you know, I created a Shinto basically shrine and for my last exhibition. So just like stop, look, listen. Yeah.
For me, the Shadows of Reality ends up being that I get to drop a person into, basically I perform for them. So there's a connection, and with VR, at least this version of it, they're very alone, right? They put it on, but especially towards the end of the video, they just see me, because I play the part of the person controlling the object, and I'm setting up the cinema room, and it's a little bit funny or odd that you see a clone of me, which always leads to conversations that I'm connecting to them, because there's no one else in the whole project. They only see me, and almost I am playing around with these objects that are all craft. They're not I made them. So there's a connection there that I have to the viewer outside of, especially I put that onto those who are not like documentary filmmakers, and I'm not trying to get them to make, you know, ethical decisions. When it's someone who knows nothing about documentary, their interpretation of the project, it's a lot more, they just shared a moment with me, and I introduced them, and I took them down to the black box and made some shadows.
Fantastic, thank you. Anthony, we've got 2 minutes before the session ends, so we need to say thank yous, but Anthony and then me.
I'll be short. I think what I've noticed about joy and sympathetic joy is that there's joy in making things, particularly in the collaborative element of it. It's not always perfect, but you build sort of camaraderie with particular people you're working with and making with, and that brings a joy. And then there's it's really important, I think, for me to observe audiences and how they're receiving work that you've made, to try and understand, you know, how are they receiving it, what are they taking from it, and then that's a way to observe, whether there was any empathy or just people just getting different meanings out of things and seeing their hopefully joy, even if the work might be a sad piece of work.
And for me, I would say it's about giving people permission. And one of the things that I've learned through delivering a lot of drawing, both as an educator and a maker, and some of the collaborative projects I showed, is it's actually the permission to look, pay attention, do something together, think and experience being through making. So for me, it's entirely about giving permission, either to receive, engage, or do. And I'm going to draw us to a close with the 1 minute we have, so that we can say an enormous thank you for brilliant presentations from Jorge, Maria, Jen, Emily and Anthony, and a huge thank you to you for really insightful presentations, and thank you to Gary Saxter for fabulous respondents, and thank you to you for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you to Leila, Santiago and the whole team for bringing us all together, and for ordering the presentations that had great connectivity that ran through them thematically this afternoon. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's contributed to this event. Thank you very much.
I just want to add thank you, Anita, for your presentation and moderating. We'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. So it's a different time than it has been. And yeah, for everyone here, please enjoy some coffee and tea. So thank you.
All right, just to reiterate, thanks again for everyone online and in the space, speakers and viewers alike. We are going to close up the Zoom momentarily. I hope you guys have a good afternoon. For those of us here, try not to get rained on. I hope that doesn't happen. We'll see. All right. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.